Hi, this is the orderIT trade activity for Friday, October the 13th, 2020. We had 8 trades that occurred today. 2 were indicated as shorts and 6 were indicated as buys. We'll review the trades. First trade is DIS, and it was 138.54 and it was closed at 138.36. It was up over 2%, so that's not bad. And it tripped at around 11.43, so roughly around that line. So it did come up 138.80, 138.74. So it's a positive trade because there was points during the day after the indication or entry point that it did come above that price. So that is a positive trade. Just take a look at the analysis. OBV showing it did come up in the afternoon, stabilized, I guess. MACD came up in the morning, came up in the afternoon, did come down a bit again in the late afternoon. DI showing somewhat very positive across the board. In Bollinger Bands, it did come up and somewhat moved sideways in the afternoon. But the end result is it was still a positive trade because you could have made money at the point that it would have been purchased. Next trade is EAT, Breaker International, up to 0.69%. That's a good indication. 47.54, 47.30. So it's also showing that it didn't come up. It tripped at roughly 12.10. So it tripped around this area, and that's 47.54. It was tripped at basically its high point for the day, and then somewhat looked like it stabilized, but didn't come above the price, so that's not an explicit buy indication. OBV, you can see moving strongly at the end of the day, even though somewhat moving sideways during most of the day. MACD, positive in the early afternoon and positive in the late afternoon. The rest of the day bouncing back and forth. DI, again positive in the morning and then bouncing back and forth. Bollinger Band showing mostly sideways. I'm going to mark this as a questionable because it's not strong indication wise, and the chart itself showing no explicit movement in the direction, but because it's moving fairly much sideways, via Bollinger Band, and that was strangely enough. Yes, no, not strange enough. You can see at the end of the day it was making a recovery, so it looks like potentially that this would have been a positive the day after. Next trade is the OCU. This is a short sell. It was tripped at 130 at a price of 206.38. It came down to 205.70, so that's a positive trade. You can see that just from the chart itself, it's moving downwards after the tripping price, which was right around here, so it did come down. The analysis of it is showing roughly the same thing, even though end of the day you can see it was making a little bit of recovery at the end of the day. It's basically the mid-afternoon it was dropping. DI showing the same thing, dropping in the afternoon, and Bollinger Band showing the same thing. It did come down though after its trigger price, and then basically went down to a point after that. End of the day it did come back a little bit, but it was already down below the entry point that was indicated. Next trade is CODX, another short sell. It was tripped at 220 at a price of 15.15. It ended the day at 14.98. So this is another positive trade because it ended the day below the tripping price. And you can see it was somewhat moving downwards right across the board from the just stock price movement. The indicators showing that it came down in the afternoon, bouncing back and forth late afternoon and mid to late afternoon. It was actually showing negative, positive. MACD showing positive. The MACD showing it bouncing back and forth, but at the end of the day, it was actually coming down again. DI got strong across the board, so DI showing very strong and it's moving negative, and again, Bollinger Band pretty much is showing it moving downwards. So that again is a positive indication that it was moving downwards. Next trade is COTY, Cody Incorporated, up 8.13%. It was tripped at 250 at a price of 476 and ended the day at 479. So that's another positive trade. As you can see, yes, it's fairly much moving slowly upwards, but moving upwards still. And the indicators, end of day, mid to end of day OBV showing that it was moving upwards. MACD not really showing any strong indication. It did trip around this point, which is showing that it's moving positive. DI somewhat, the afternoon was showing that it was strong, positive in the afternoon. The morning looks like it was bouncing back a little bit. Bollinger Band actually showing that it was moving very much in the positive direction. And SG is the next trade. And you can see that this is a trade tripped at 251. At a price of 9.34, it actually closed at 9.32, and it tripped at 251, so roughly around that area, 9.34, 9.34. Yeah, that's a hard one to indicate. OBV is showing looks like in the day it was moving upwards. MACD showing end of day moving upwards, even though the end of day reversed a little bit. DI showing the same thing, bouncing back and forth, somewhere on DI, Bollinger Bands, moving sideways. Again, another difficult one to make a conclusion on. Next trade is CZR. It tripped at 302 at a price of 61.15. This was a buy trade, and it closed the day at 61.38. So that's another positive buy. And you can see it came up in the morning and somewhat moved sideways in the afternoon. And OBV is actually showing very strongly positive for the whole day. MACD, morning, afternoon a little bit, but it wasn't 100% consistent. In fact, early to mid-afternoon it was showing it was moving downwards, even though OBV was showing moving strong. DI showing roughly the same thing, even though it was a good amount of positive movement. Bollinger Band showing the same thing. It came up and it stabilized, but at the end of the day it was moving up again. Technically it's a positive trade, even though the indicators are not strong. Next trade is LYV. It was tripped at 325 at a price of 66.22. And it ended the day at 66.08, increase of 6.17. 325. This is showing that it did move above the indication price right after, even though at the end of the day it did come down. Let's check the indicators. These are the indicators. OBV is showing it moving upwards in the morning to early afternoon. Came down a bit, stabilized, and came down end of day. MACD actually showing that it was actually moving negative for the most part the whole day. It came up at the end of the day or middle of the afternoon. End of the day it was coming down again. DI showing somewhat a reversal of that. It was actually showing a very positive movement in the morning, a bit of a negative in the early afternoon, and then a positive at the end of the day, negative. 100 man showing the same thing. MACD is, the indicators are not showing strongly that it's moving positive, but in the end result it did end up the day being up. And again, it was up 6.17%, so it was up pretty positive the whole day. And there was points in time, even after the indication price did come up above the entry point. So I consider it a positive trade. It's a very, very tricky trade, obviously, because you would have had to monitor it just to make sure that you got out when it did move above the trade price. And we had to indicate the aspect that says you can see that it was pretty much moving sideways, and knowing that, unless you see anything strongly, that to get out when the opportunity arrives. And this would have been roughly 6 out of 8 trades, which is 75% positive trade results, which is again a good day. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.